Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining this session. And I would like to introduce colleague Dr. Michael Nuccitelli. So the focus of the session today is about information, education, all about the concept of the iPredator. Now, the iPredator is the creator of this concept is Dr. Michael Nuccitelli, who has done a wealth of research into the iPredator. So who is Dr. Michael Nuccitelli? He's a New York State licensed psychologist, cyber psychology researcher, and online safety educator. Dr. Nuccitelli completed his doctorate degree in clinical psychology in the 90s from Adler University in Chicago, and is also a licensed psychologist in the New York State. He is the author of the theoretical construct termed the iPredator. Dr. Nuccitelli is also a cyber bullying, internet safety, cybercrime, online predator, and cyber criminal psychology educator and investigator. And the reason we've invited Dr. Nuccitelli on to speak to us today, it's going to be an audience with Dr. Nuccitelli. We have some questions we'd like to ask you, but it's really about helping, develop a better understanding of this concept, Dr. Nuccitelli. Many people have not heard of the iPredator. Who is the iPredator? Who do we refer to when we're talking about an iPredator? And really, so we're going to have this audience with you, question and answer, to expand on these discussions. So I'd like to say a huge thank you for coming on and speaking with us today. I'd also like to introduce Action Against Stalking Throughcare team. Can I just introduce Jen Lodine, who's the Throughcare Services Manager, and Amanda Morrison, who is one of the Throughcare practitioners. We do have another member staff who's unable to be with us today, but we will still be entering into very active discussions. We've scheduled this session to last for approximately an hour to an hour 20 minutes. So I'll be part of that team because I've got hundreds of questions I want to ask you as well. You did present an online conference, the Action Against Stalking International Conference in 2021, and was hugely successful. So you've already introduced the concept of the iPredator. So today is really about expanding on that and gaining a deeper understanding of who this iPredator actually is. So thank you very much. Now I'm going to hand you over to the team, and I'm part of that team, but I will not be leading on the questions. Okay, so thank you very much, and thank you everyone for joining us. So can I hand over to whoever wants? Amanda, yeah, let's go.
Hello, Michael. It's an absolute pleasure to meet you, and thank you so much for entertaining our questions and curiosity around cyber stalking and iPredator.
I'm more than honored. And as you know, cyber stalking is one of the types of iPredator, one of the online aggressors. Would you like me to quickly give you the 8 categories or the 8 types of online aggressors, or do we have an other itinerary, whatever you prefer?
I would love it if you could start with that, and then I think we'll expand from there. Absolutely, please do.
All right. So in essence, I'll give you the dime tour of iPredator. It is a dark side of cyberspace concept. I wrote iPredator, began to jot it down back in 2008, 2009, finally wrote the paper and published it in 2010. And essentially, as I mentioned, is that iPredator is a dark side of cyberspace concept that presents 8 types of online aggressors. So it's a global concept. So the 8 types are, first, which is the pediatric iPredator, which are cyberbullies. The adult manifestation, the adult types of iPredators, first, that are adult cyberbullying would be cyber harassers, internet trolls, and cyber stalkers, which we're going to be talking a little bit about today. Then we have cyber criminals, cyber terrorists, and then to me, the most deviant of the bunch are your online child predators and online child pornography consumers and distributors. So given all 8 of those types, all of them can most certainly engage in cyberstalking, depending on your definition of cyberstalking. So those are the 8 types. And real quickly, very simply, there are 3 criteria to know if you're an iPredator or if you're being targeted by an iPredator. 1, which is very simple, is the use of information communication technology to victimize someone. 2, a self-awareness of causing harm to someone. That one can be a little bit foggy depending on if it's a child or if the person suffers from a significant psychiatric illness. So a self-awareness. And then 3, the creation and implementation of cyber stealth, which is AKA online deception and or digital cloaking. So if you meet those criteria, you are an iPredator. So that is iPredator in a nutshell.
Can I just ask and expand on that?
Sure.
Dr. Nuccitelli. So are you saying that
Ms. Ann, you can call me Michael. You don't have to.
Let's go with the Michael, shall we? Yes, fine.
Yeah, it's much easier.
So are you saying then, just to clarify, that the iPredator is a new breed of stalker, or just a predator who uses cyber technology?
Excellent question. And thank you for asking that, because I've been asked that before. And the answer to me is no, it is a new breed. Again, this is my concept in terms of my thinking and my belief is at one time, I was a forensic psychologist working in the court systems, criminal, civil, and also the family courts. So I had conducted forensic assessments for years. I have studied what is called the criminal mind, psychopaths, sociopaths, so forth and so on. But with the advent of the information age, information technology, that has completely changed the dynamics when it comes to perpetrator and victim. So the vast majority of iPredators are not engaging in criminal activities, albeit many do, such as cyber criminals, online child predators, and some cyber stalking, but the vast majority of victimization that's going on by iPredators is done legally, such as cyberbullying. So the other thing that I want the listeners to understand is that we are at the beginning of a period of history called the information age. They're saying that the information age began somewhere in the late 70s. The birthday of the internet is, I'm almost positive, 1983. So we're at the beginning of a period of history that is going to last centuries. The next step of the information age, which I think we're going to talk a little bit later, is virtual reality and artificial intelligence. Those 2 aspects, as I've mentioned before, are going to completely, utterly change the human condition. So to me, iPredator, using technology to harm others, the internet, social media, all of that is not just a tool, because then again, Ann, our hand is a tool, but it's certainly not, just a tool. It is part of our body. And then lastly, before we move on, I also believe, and I think I've mentioned this before at the conference, is that I believe that cyberspace is an extension of human consciousness. And not so much that it is, I don't want it to sound like a conspiracy, it's more of a metaphor. And as each year goes on, all of us we're already totally enveloped by information technology, but it's going to become even more so. So to me, when I say cyberspace is an extension of human consciousness, I really believe cyberspace, the digital universe, is a whole entirely different environment. But thank you for asking that question.
That's interesting, because I was always under the impression that, if you stood a person standing in a box and shouting out to a street would deliver the same message as someone communicating it on using cyber, but we are really looking at a brand new concept here.
Yes. Oh, and that is a great, when you use that metaphor. So yes. So if I'm out offline on the street and somebody's yelling on the box, one thing, Ann, I can use all 5 senses. Obviously, I'm not touching him, but I can access and use all my senses. I can observe and intuit a nonverbal communication through the guy that's on the box. But when you're online, and I see that same guy online, many of the senses that I've come to develop and use for self-preservation and for intuiting and understanding, I can't use those. So it's an entirely different psychology and cyber psychology. It's a whole different way of interacting on it. And it just goes on and on and on in terms of understanding the difference between online victimization and offline victimization. Similar, but very different as well.
So I'm going to hand over to the team after this one more question. So for the iPredator then, because we've got when we're looking at stalking, we've got the ex-partner stalking, we've got stalking in the workplace, the acquaintance and stalker. So am I right in saying that iPredator tends to be of this stranger stalking typology? Is that what we're talking about?
No, not at all. The vast majority, again, I don't know the actual statistics, but roughly 85 to 90% of all cyber stalkers, okay, the victim knows or has an idea who that individual is. And thank you, that's very important to bring it up. It's only, when it comes to cyber stalking, it's only the small percentage, 5, maybe 10%. I call them ghost cyber stalkers. And those are internet trolls who become predatory trolls. Those can be online child predators. Because again, if I may, cyber stalking, according to me, there's 3 types of cyber stalking. There is persistently contacting, over and over somebody. So that is, stop cyber stalking me, when you are constantly, which is kind of like cyber harassing, but different. It is habitually contacting somebody using information technology, electronic devices. Cyber stalking is also electronic surveillance, online surveillance, watching somebody, trying to profile them, going to their different social profiles and collecting data. So that element, that type of cyber stalking, the victim knows nothing about it until they engage the target. But lastly, which is the most important, and to me, which defines the cyber stalker, is the use of information technology to create fear or to cause direct or indirect physical harm, to make threats. And if you do that enough, that to me is cyber stalking.
Well, thank you, Michael, because that clears up my understanding, because I always had the idea of the stranger stalker and not the other stalker. So what you're saying is just to clarify that actually it can be the majority is someone that the victim knows.
Most certainly.
That's incredible. Thank you so much for imparting that information. I'm going to hand over because I've done enough talking here. So to the rest of the team to forward these discussions.
Okay, Michael, so that's really fantastic information. And I think what we're finding with a lot of the victims that we're supporting is we're getting a real combination these days of physical and cyber stalking. Mm-hmm. And when referring to your victim prevention and intervention strategies on your website, I was wondering if you could break down prevention versus intervention to give us kind of an idea of what that looks like in action.
Sure. Well, I mean, prevention obviously is practicing online safety. It's how do we conduct ourselves online? Now, we'll go under the premise that if you're being stalked offline, we can almost assume, again, it's not yet, but I would venture to say 95 to 100% of all offline stalking also includes online stalking. at a minimum, at least online surveillance. Almost all of us now in all industrialized nations access on a daily basis information technology, social media. So when a victim is being stalked offline, it is almost assuredly that they're being targeted and cyber stalked online. So they essentially go hand in hand, unless we're talking about what I call the ghost cyber stalker. And the ghost cyber stalker is somebody who's trying to frighten you, making indirect or direct threats of physical harm. He or she is doing that, and you've never met them before. But that is the minority of attacks that go on. The vast majority, as I say, if you don't know them directly, you know of them, or in some circumstances by proxy, that iPredator has hired and or manipulated others to target the victim, and that's called by proxy. So when we're dealing with prevention, we're talking about online safety. Online safety, number one, is, obviously not clicking on links. We won't go through all the different online safety tips. It is practicing online safety. Number two, it is personal information. The less personal information you share online, the lower probability you have of being targeted by iPredators, being targeted successfully by a stalker slash cyber stalker, again, assuming he or she knows you. And that is where, personal information plays a role. Two, very quickly, is sexually themed content. The less sexual themed content you exchange online, particularly if you're in a relationship with somebody and you're in love and you're sending and exchanging erotic photos or images and oftentimes videos, that is almost assuredly going to set you up for such thing as extortion, revenge porn, cyber stalking, particularly if that relationship turns adversarial. So that is the prevention education piece. And then lastly, under prevention education is digital citizenship. And digital citizenship, very simply, is how you conduct oneself. How do you conduct yourself online? It's important, and not that, you can't debate, not that you can't kid around, but it's always understanding that you have to be respectful to others, because you don't know who you're really talking to. So that is prevention.
Thank you so very much. Is there a way that we could maybe have a look at intervention strategies?
Of course, and I have those written down.
Oh, thank you so much.
Oh, yes. So the first thing is that if you're being targeted, and this applies to, not all, but many of the iPredator types. First and foremost, and I see we're going to be talking that in a little bit, for you as an individual, it's understanding the subconcept of iPredator called odor. Offline distress dictates online response. And in a nutshell, as again, we're going to talk about a little bit later, is how my offline life is going, my subjective processing, how I'm dealing, my perceptions offline, I believe has a direct influence into not only what I do online, but my interpretation of what I see, read, or what is being done to me. So the first intervention step is, when you're being targeted, cyber stalked, cyber harassed, trolled, is to check yourself, is to understand that your offline life, did you have a bad day at work? Are you afraid about a test you're going to take tomorrow? Did you just get in an argument with your husband or wife? Do you have financial problems? All of those aspects, all of those events that are occurring offline, I believe directly has an impact and influences what you do online. And when it comes to being targeted, as we know, when a person is being victimized, both offline and online, we're anxious, we're concerned, we are fearful of the unpredictability nature of being targeted. And if we're not careful and we're already in a distressed state offline, we bring it all online. So that is the first step, is to check yourself. Again, I usually say to myself, and this too shall pass. I wish I can meditate, but I can't. So it is understanding that you don't want to allow yourself to become too overwhelmed. Second to that, to the odor, is do not obsess. I have volunteered after working on the weekends now for over a decade. And I'm assuming, again, I don't keep data, probably several hundred folks over the last 10 years. And in every single phone call, I always talk about this. Do not obsess. Do not fixate. I have helped people and worked with people online who, when their stalker, their offline stalker, quick example, drives a white Ram tough truck. Well, if she obsesses over it and worries about it now all of a sudden, this has happened, every white truck, whether it's a Ford, it's a Chevrolet, whether it's a Range Rover, every white truck now becomes that stalker. Some call that confirmation bias, which I guess we can say it is, but it's making sure that you don't become fixated. I have helped, and I'm not passing judgment or laughing, but I have helped people who the fixate and the obsession becomes so bad and they don't have psychiatric illness, at least they didn't tell me, where they begin to believe that the television, and this is before smart televisions, they begin to believe the television, they suspected behind the walls, there are devices. So if you obsess and you fixate, you ultimately become paranoid, and now your fears take on a life of its own. So that is the first intervention, is to not fixate, to understand your state of mind. The second, which some of your listeners are going to laugh, but is to compile evidence. Now, today, and I am very supportive of law enforcement. I'm Big Blue. I support our fellow, both military, I support law enforcement, but it's important to compile evidence so that if you have to file a report. Now, when I say that I support law enforcement here in the United States, not all, but most of the times, and a percentage of my volunteer work, many of them have gone to the police department to lodge a complaint. Unfortunately, it has fallen on deaf ears because the way the police are looking at it is, unless it is an offline stalker, unless he or she is directly in your face or has a proverbial knife to your throat, what can we do? Which I understand, but you really can't expect law enforcement to do a lot in the beginning stages. But what you can do is you can get a report. So you begin to compile evidence so that if it ever comes to a court system or a court of law, or you're looking to get, here they call them order of protections or protection protection orders. You're able to have evidence of why there needs to be a restraining order is what I was also trying to say. So that is number two. So the other thing is to review your social media. Again, this goes back to what I talked about in the beginning about personal information, is to going to all your social media accounts and making sure that you have reduced personal information. Facebook, for instance, real quickly, is you have privacy settings. If you have your privacy settings set to public, let's say you don't know that, your stalker, your offline stalker, who's also now your online stalker, he now can see everything. So it's making sure that your social media accounts, your blog, your website, it's having as minimal amount of personal information as possible. And then what else? Oh, and lastly, Again, this is an intervention. If you suspect you've been hacked or that your cyber stalker, your iPredator, is tech savvy, it is bringing your devices to, they're either called digital forensic specialists, information security professionals, or certified ethical hackers. It's bringing them to those professionals and making sure that you haven't been hacked, that you haven't had spyware, malware, and all the different forms of viruses that can be, entered into your devices.
Can I just actually expand on that, because that's so interesting, because with when we support victims of stalking, it's about keeping that log, a chronological log of all the incidents.
Very important.
But also supporting that with gathering evidence. But we also work with victims to develop a safety action plan, because the three things victims report. If you say, well, what's the worst scenario? Well, number one, what will happen to me? Will I be attacked? Or how long will it go on for? And if it stops, will it ever start again? So there's developing a safety action plan, but is that, because we're looking at those stalkers that are more working in the physical domain, not the cyber domain. So as a safety action plan, that's going to be more difficult to formulate, is it, Michael?
Well, the safety, again, it's hard. We don't have real hard statistics, but I'm assuming, again, I'll assume is that 85 to 90% of all cyber stalking, the person is known, the stalker. So I assume that the vast majority of, when it comes to cyber stalking, is an offline stalker. It's only the minority that is what I call the ghost cyber stalker. So from an intervention standpoint, is whatever is recommended for victims of offline stalking, it applies to cyber stalking as well. Compiling evidence, having an action plan of what to do. See, the thing is with cyber stalking is, for offline stalking, I have to get in my car, I have to drive to your house, I have to, I have to behave, I have to engage in action. Cyber stalking, I can sit here in my fat butt and I can do a lot of damage to you, and I can do a lot of surveillance. And Ann, I don't even have to leave my chair. And that is why it's all changing in terms of the iPredator and online aggression. And as I said, one definition of cyber stalking is online surveillance. So your stalker, you may have a restraining order or order protection, but how do you know that that stalker is not surveilling you online? And he's created a what's called a sock puppet or a phony profile, and now is engaging you in social media, but yet he's presenting himself as a 40-year-old wonderful woman, but in reality, he's your stalker.
Wow, it's frightening. Yeah, thanks for that, Michael.
So also from your website, ipredator.org, you discussed a little bit about dark psychology motivational goals.
Yes.
An absolutely fascinating topic from a budding psychologist. And when we're talking about that 99%, would these goals be similar to the goals postulated by iPredator? So for example, your deviant fantasies, your power and control and retribution?
Thank you, doctor. Yes, exactly. So all of those, dark psychology is essentially a dark side of human consciousness concept that, in a nutshell, it assumes that we all have this aspect, not to use Jungian terms, but we all have this aspect within us, this ability to engage in evil, okay, to engage in violence. But by the grace of God, because we're social creatures, and many of us have kindness in our hearts, we don't engage in violent, evil actions. But we have thoughts. There is no person on the face of the earth that doesn't have those. But when it comes to online, again, I believe when I say cyberspace is an extension of human consciousness, dark side of human consciousness, as well as dark psychology. When we go online, I believe, and this is also related to odor, offline distress dictates online response, is that our capacity to fantasize, and when I say fantasize, I don't mean sexual fantasy. The vast majority of fantasy that we experience from the moment we wake up to the moment we go to bed, we engage in fantasy. When you are driving to work, you are essentially dissociating. You're not focused on driving the road. I mean, yes, you're focusing somewhat, but really you're thinking about that pretty, person that, well, I was going to say pretty girl that you want to talk to, strike a conversation with, the bills that you got to pay, what you're going to talk about today at work. You are dissociating. Your mind is in a world of fantasy. So when it comes to the motivational factors, they are exactly the same. The only difference is, and thank you for asking that question, is that we have iPredator, and then we have what I call is iPredator Bridge. Now, what iPredator Bridge is, it's a subconcept of iPredator, and those are individuals who start off, they're not iPredators. They're not targeting you for criminal, deviant, abusive, or severe narcissistic reasons. iPredator Bridge, these are online users that begin to target you because they disagree. And they disagree, and I will read you very quickly iPredator Bridge, because the vast majority of online users who become iPredators are iPredator Bridge. They're not criminals. They're not deviants. They're not narcissistic personality disorder per se, or access to personality. So what iPredator Bridge is these are individuals because they target you because of self-righteousness, moral turpitude, ideological conditions, and pro-social perceptual distortions. They're not driven by criminal, malevolent, or deviant behaviors. They're driven by other things. And quick, for instance, okay, one of the most sensitive topics is whether you are pro-life or pro-choice. Well, if I'm targeting you, let's say I'm pro-life, and I'm targeting you because you're pro-choice, I become an iPredator. I'm harming you. I'm self-aware I'm harming you. I'm using cyber stealth, but I'm doing it because I have an ideological belief. And that is what iPredator Bridge is. And the vast majority of cyber attacks, as it relates to iPredator, originate from this realm I call iPredator Bridge.
Fascinating.
That is absolutely fascinating. So would you say, with the concept of cyber stealth, so I think you already touched on that includes by proxy, the hiring of others to carry out their attacks?
Most certainly. Most certainly. Again, cyber stealth, it's AKA is online deception and or digital cloaking used to engage in criminal or deviant activities, or to profile, locate, stalk, or engage in target. So cyber stealth is a big term. Sometimes iPredators, such as offline stalkers, when they're engaging in online stalking, again, one of the three is online surveillance. You may not even know who they are. Or let's say the offline stalker creates a profile impersonating someone else, I don't know, a young man or a female that lives 1 or 2 counties over that you meet on a social media, but it's actually your offline stalker. He's engaging in digital cloaking. So essentially, cyber stealth is online deception and digital cloaking. And the iPredator may or may not want you to know his or her identity. Hence, by proxy is I manipulate or I pay others to target you, which is occurring at greater portions as we walk through the information age.
Thank you so much. And before I hand over to my colleague, Jen, I just want to expand slightly on this particular question, because I'm finding it quite relevant with what's happening with some of the victims we've come across these days. So when you have a cyber stealth iPredator and they are behaving by proxy, they're hiring others to carry out the attacks. However, these attacks then become in person. So for an example, a victim leaves their home, and every time they leave their home, there's somebody across the street that's being filmed and videoed. And these are then uploaded online. And they're hired by the original stealth ghost iPredator. What intervention would you suggest in your experience for a victim such as this?
I wish I had plenty of interventions. That's a great question. This is why we need more, and I'm not getting a marketing check by the Center for Action Against Stalking, but this is why we need many of those, because essentially what needs to occur in this particular situation or situations is that we need an aggregator. We need, such as the center, that aggregates the information, the evidence, and what's going on, so that then it is reported to the police. Again, I know one of the questions you're going to ask me about is IP 3141, and I'll say it then as I say now, is that what we need is, both here in the United States, where you are, UK and Scotland, is that there needs to be hundreds of centers for action against, maybe at every university, so that when an individual is targeted, cyber stalked, offline stalked, they're able to report it. It's all aggregated, and then the center is able to work with that individual to report it to law enforcement, so that everybody can work together, so that the assailant is identified, apprehended, and brought to justice.
I think we need to come and set up an action against stalking centre over in New York, Michael, without a doubt we do.
Well, again, I believe there should be one. And again, with IP 3141, this is an idea that I brought up several years ago. I've never marketed it. It sits at my website because everything is free. But I believe every county in this country, here in the United States, 3,141 of them, should have a center. You have Center for Action Against Stalking. Hey, we can call it Center for Action Against Stalking, but every county in the continental United States would benefit from having a center such as yours, where an individual could contact, could visit, and get help from. We don't have those.
Interesting, really interesting.
I think it might be my turn. So all of your answers have been so full. I think you've answered some of our questions already. But I would like to ask you a bit about, we're noticing, particularly with people experiencing online stalking, that the stalker tends to branch out more than in offline stalking. So they start to engage multiple victims. So they've looked on their Facebook profile and then found their sister and their ex-girlfriend, and it becomes quite complex dealing with multiple people who are having their own experience, but their own experience of this one kind of one person who's sort of stalking all of them with one primary victim. And I'd love to hear your advice on how to handle those cases.
Well, again, that's a very, when you say complex case, that is a complex case. But what we're seeing is, again, through my research, is that it's happening more where you have not lone stalkers, but you have individuals that, will stalk multiple victims. So again, whether they are targeting, folks that they don't know, whether they're targeting people that they do know, most importantly, as I think going back to, and again, the Center for Action is where it begins. So you're already beginning to do it. It is, again, you have confidentiality issues, issues of consent, but it is doing your best let's say, as the center to ally those victims. So if you have one stalker / cyber stalker and you have multiple victims, it is being able, through consent, is connecting the victims of the one stalker and essentially comparing notes. And obviously working with the center to be able to create that loop. That is the first step. Because when victims of the same stalker can hear similar stories, they begin, it immediately has a sense of, it reduces the anxiety and reduces the fear. Why? Because they can affiliate, because they can validate one another. They feel recognized. And again, they feel part of what's being done to them. So that is very crucial, if it can be done, is to introduce one another and to hopefully get them to be associates. That can be very helpful to everyone.
So would that, so can I just say that's excellent, because would that say for the Throughcare team, maybe setting up an online meeting with all the different victims?
That would be, that's an excellent idea. Yeah, of course. Yes. And
I guess
not
that
just,
part of the, sorry.
I'm sorry, not just, so there would be two, I mean, and that is a wonderful, I got to write that down, is that you would have, you would connect the victims of, let's say, stalker A, cyber stalker A, but also just in general, if the center had a forum that met every Tuesday, where people could come to learn, but most importantly, the benefit that would occur from the victims who are being targeted by the one-eyed predator, I have to imagine that it would be very therapeutic and beneficial, and it would not significantly, but it would considerably reduce the anxiety and the fear. Because we're going through the same thing,
It's interesting.
I think part of the complexity for us quite often, if there's like a primary target and then these kind of offshoot targets, the people who are experiencing the kind of secondary stalking are at the mercy of that primary person, if you see what I mean. Because it's like, if I'm being stalking and my sister's being stalked as a consequence of that,
yes,
if I then choose to engage with my stalker or somehow kind of incite them to do something, or then that has repercussions for all these people that the stalking is
most certainly. And that brings up, again, we're not talking about it today, but one of the categories of iPredator is internet troll. Well, what we have is, and you kind of just touched on it, is called the predatory troll, which I introduced a couple of years ago. And what the predatory troll is, the internet troll is somebody historically who goes online and he gets the proverbial ego stroke because he's provoking you, he's getting you mad, all right? The predatory troll, which occurs not just as an individual, but also in groups, the predatory trolls go after you, your sister, your family, your job, your school, your religious organization, goes after every aspect of your life. And they are looking not just to provoke you, but to character assassinate you, completely, take away your integrity and your online reputation. And if it gets to the point, the severity, the predatory troll becomes a cyber stalker and now makes indirect or direct threats of physical harm to your sister, to co-workers, to co-students, so forth and so on. So, I mean, I wish, and again, hopefully I live long, where I would be able to answer all these questions with 1, 2, 3. But again, we are at the beginning of a period history that is new to all of us, and I've been told by many others here, it's like the wild, wild west. It's uncharted territory. And I know that may sound like an excuse, but the reality is, it is uncharted territory because we're at the beginning of a period of history.
And it's also unmarshaled territory. It's not even uncharted, it's unmarshaled. There's a
Oh my gosh, yes.
A lawlessness to it as well, isn't there? Which has been well recognized with the internet. So thanks for that, Michael. Yeah, we certainly are in, well, I suppose it's a dream world, isn't it? We'll talk about dream worlds a bit later on, but it's a dream world for stalkers because it's unmarshaled, unregulated. And
yes, there's no accountability, and yeah, I don't know how we create, well, I mean, the centers for that, I mean, accountability can come from help. And again, let me just say this very quickly. It is believing. Now, obviously, and again, the several hundred folks that I have volunteered helping over the years, some of them had, Axis 1 or Axis 2. Again, I wasn't doing psychological assessments, but I would ask them, and just through talking to them, you would know that there's some type of psychological dysfunction. But even though when I have helped the schizophrenic who is, maybe not taking his or her medication, in my volunteer work, I believe them, even though in my mind, they believe in gang stalking or they're a targeted individual. But in terms of helping them, I start by believing them that they're being victimized. So I just wanted to put that across. I'm sure that the center practices primary empathy, and that, when folks call, you listen and you believe what their experience and you understand their experience. That is paramount. I just wanted to put that out there, Anne, for anybody who's going to engage in helping others.
I think you touched on this a bit already, and it is kind of back to basics question, but a lot of I guess some of the discomfort for us sometimes is a lot of safety advice for people experiencing stalking. It involves somehow making their world smaller. So, you might not be able to go to work at the moment, or you might need to change it so that you don't have that online account. And have you got a sort of set of online safety advice you give to people experiencing cyber stalking that isn't about making their kind of cyber world and cyber experience smaller and more restricted?
That's a great question. Oftentimes, again, this is not all, in my volunteer work, which, by the way, the vast majority of my experience and my knowledge, thank God, comes from my volunteer work and folks that I've spoken to over the years. I wish I could say it was my academic prowess, but it's not. But when it comes to cyber stalk, and this has happened too, where police and loved ones and concerned of the victims had said, delete it, turn it off. Okay. Goodness gracious, we live in the information age. We are surrounded, we are enveloped by information communication technology. And guess what? It's only going to become more enveloping. So to tell a victim to turn it off, to delete it, to essentially shut off your computer is utterly ridiculous, because we can. Now, as I said in the beginning, but what you can do is you can reduce and be mindful of the personal information that you're putting out there online. Okay. We all know that information can be managed in three ways. We can disseminate information, we can compile information, and we can exchange. So that's compile, disseminate, exchange. Those are the only three ways that we can manage information in the digital universe. So one thing is, as a victim of stalking / cyber stalking, is to be mindful of that and reduce the information that you're putting out there related to your personal self. Now, let's say, for instance, you have a passion, I always like to talk about cheddar cheese. I love cheddar cheese. So that you can certainly talk about cheddar cheese. Your blog can be about cheddar cheese, but you certainly don't want to mention your address where you're thinking about selling cheddar cheese. Okay, so it's understanding the type of personal information and the amount of personal information you disseminate is very important. Less is better. But I certainly don't believe shutting down shop and avoiding the internet, because why? We live in the information age.
Well, and that's something that we do give advice to victims about, is if they've been advised, whether by law enforcement or friends even, to block the number, say it's coming over digital mobile technology, block the number, block them in Facebook. And of course, what's happens is that they lose all this vital evidence, which of the course of conduct, which constitutes the crime. So we need them to stay on these social media sites. If they're being stalked and they block the stalker, number one, their reptilian brain for safety-seeking behaviours can't kick in because they're not monitoring what's going on. Secondly, they're losing vital information that the police will need to use if they're going to try and investigate and take forward a charge. And thirdly, it may be the one trigger that will, trigger that stalker to then move into the physical domain, which has happened so many times before.
Right, and you are so correct, Anne. So for me, again, in my volunteer work, is there have been some where it comes down to the victim, to the individual. I mean, it would be nice if they all had thick skin and they were able to deal with, the abuse and the taunting. But the reality is, again, offline distress dictates online response. If in their offline life and everything that they're dealing with in their offline world is stress provoking, coming online and now being targeted and wondering if the on and on and on and on, sometimes it's important for them to block the individual, even though they know, and I tell them, he's only going to create another profile, but you still block them anyway. The other thing, the old adage is, which many of you all know, is called, you don't feed the troll, is you don't engage them. That is one I almost say all the time. But depending on the individual, that is the recommendation on whether you block them and shut them off. It depends on the person and their state of mind and how they're feeling at the time.
Thank you for that, Michael. And which is why they really need to come and get help and support, so we can help tolerate the anxiety and the distress of it while they remain online till they gather all that evidence. So that places a very high need for specialized support.
Yeah, if I may say, just for you, and again, and it has, and particularly men, okay, for entire year, well, on two separate occasions, I was trolled. My anger got to the point where I almost got in my car and drove, and I knew who he was. So to the point where I was going to confront him, which wouldn't have been a pretty scene. And I am the father of this concept. I practice digital citizenship, online safety educator. I'm a psychologist, for goodness sake. You would think Dr. Nuccitelli would, at that time, would have been able to, namaste, practice and not allow myself. But I essentially, I'm admitting it, I became consumed by this online user, this guy who was, faming, taunting. Again, it's on my website. He actually purchased my name, michaelnuccitelli.net, created an entire website, attempted to contact my ex-wife, and then also created content on the Michael Nuccitelli website saying that I endorse child sexual exploitation. Oh. I got so angry, and this is after calling GoDaddy hosting company. They refused to remove it. I was told that I would have to get a subpoena from a court in order to be able to potentially, not guarantee, get that website shut down. No. So for me, I am saying, as an individual, as somebody who's type B personality, consider myself pretty laid back. I practice stress, I exercise, I eat healthy. At least I try to eat healthy, try not to eat cheddar cheese. I got so angry. So it's understanding, Anne, that no matter how healthy you are, if you don't practice, no, I don't want to say meditate. If you don't practice calm, you will become fixated. And myself, I became obsessed and fixated. Again, I wanted to get in my car and drive there. And if I had, a lot of trouble would have came.
Thanks for that. Cool.
I think one of the complexities we get as well is quite often our clients have received well-meaning advice, which is just don't look at it. So don't go online and look at it. Don't look at the videos they're pointing at you. Don't look at it, and then you won't be being stalked, which is basically like a denial of what you're saying about how we live in a digital world, and you can't. It's there, isn't it? It's like having someone stood outside your house.
Exactly. It's the not knowing. So what is worse, you know, you defaming me, slandering me, character assassinating me, or me not checking, wondering what you're saying and doing online to make me look like I'm a bad guy. To me, I don't have the actual research, but I am telling you, the unpredictability, not knowing, ignorance, okay, ignorance is bliss, does not apply when you're being targeted, when you're being targeted online. Ignorance is bliss. It does not work, because not knowing but suspecting and not knowing, you know, what's being said or being done, that is only going to cause more anxiety, more fear, and, you know, and is only going to cause more distress.
So I have another
I'm
question.
not saying, again, I'm not saying obsess and fixate and spend every waking hour looking for, you know, the character assassination, the disinformation content. But so it's keeping it in moderation. So we don't want to completely avoid, but at the same time, we don't want to become an online Sherlock Holmes and spend all our free time looking for content that is defamatory and slanderous.
Thanks, Michael.
Michael, this has just been so incredibly informative.
Oh, thank you.
Really incredibly informative. You've answered really all of my questions. So I just wanted to jump in and say once again, thank you very much. So I don't know if anybody else has anything they want to bring in, because even the further one you've answered.
Jen, have you got any other questions?
I have got one more question, which you sort of covered, but I'll regret it if I don't ask you one more time. And it wasn't on the advanced list, but I guess if you were to meet a person, so imagine I've come out of the Amazon rainforest and I have no digital footprint whatsoever, and I say I want an online life, what would be your top 3 bits of advice for me, like how to begin safely?
I would say, well, of course, I would say, because you came out of the forest, I just want to let you know we're at the beginning of a period of history called the information age. So I would say most certainly introduce you to technology. You know, I would then ask, what are your aspirations? What would you like to do? There are folks that I know offline that have minimal exposure and minimal time spent online, although they have to use information technology when it comes to doing, let's say, progress notes. But even for myself, you know, we live in the world of mobile devices and smartphones. I specifically, not that I'm afraid of becoming mobile device addicted or internet addicted, but I do not use my mobile device, my smartphone, unless it's a patient emergency or it's something very important from one of my psychologists. Outside of that, I don't use my old mobile device. The Gen Z folks at work, God bless them, they think, I can't believe you don't use your smartphone. You're not I don't. And I don't do that because I spend enough time at my desktop and at my laptop. So you coming out of the rainforest, the first thing I'm going to say, well, what are your aspirations? What would you like to do? And then I would begin to say, there are good people online, and then there are bad people online. I would talk to you a little bit about online safety, and then we would take it from there to see what your interests are.
I think that's so, I'm going to take away that thing of what are your aspirations for your online existence? Because I think that's what's been missed, what's useful for our clients to reflect on when we're talking about how they need to change their presence online to stay safe, is what is it that they want to get from existing online?
One of the things that you're going to notice going forward, and I'm seeing it as of now in my volunteer work, but also with, I by day, I work with the chronically mentally ill, schizophrenic, schizoaffective, bipolar, some developmental disorders, some dementia, so forth and so on. So I work with adult chronically mentally ill, and they are just being introduced to information technology. They're just being introduced to cell phones and the smartphone. So these individuals that I'm working with, it is a blessing for me. It's a breath of fresh air that I can talk to them, and we're not talking about technology. We're not talking about iPredator. We're talking about real world issues. You know, if this guy or this gal likes me, or argument, or real nonverbal, you know, offline communication issues, and what it means to live in a residential facility. But it's understanding as we move forward, information technology is going to be more enveloping. So now what it comes down to is your victims that call the center, your assailants, are they internet addicted? Okay, now there are two camps that subscribe to this notion of what is called internet addiction. There are those who don't believe internet addiction exists because there really isn't true physiological tolerance, or withdrawal or tolerance. But then there are those, which I am in the camp, I believe that internet addiction is a behavioral addiction. And the one way for you or anybody who sees this today to know if you're internet addicted is, do you suffer negative consequences from your online usage? And consequences can be physical consequences, psychological consequences, community, difficulty paying bills, relationship consequences. If you're suffering consequences and somebody confronts you about your online usage, you have to begin to look at whether or not you're internet addicted.
Mm-hmm. So then we would work with the addiction. That's working with the addiction.
Most certainly to work with the addiction. This kind of goes back to like before for the stalking / cyber stalking victim. Again, moderation. No, you don't completely, avoid any bad information, but you also don't fixate and spend every waking moment looking. And that is what we're going to see. And what do we know, Ann, about addiction in general? The more addicted, the more compulsive dependent a person is, this is both offline and online, what do they engage in more? Deception. And eventually, if the internet addiction becomes so severe, it's not only deception, but it can begin to cause them financial difficulties and so many other difficulties that you would never think that would be related to my online usage, but it is related to internet addiction.
And I think I'm just going to finish, for myself, I just wanted to clarify, because we're looking at addiction here, but I think there's something, and it's maybe for another day we talk about it, is the intrapsychic nature of this crime, which really brings in the psychology of human behavior, looking at what is it about these intrapsychic, how does it play out? How does it work? What are the theories that support it? I think that would be a very interesting discussion one day, but not for today because we'll not have the time.
Yeah. Oh, of course. I would love to hear what others have to say. I have my own understanding when you say intrapsychic. And again, I just real quickly on another show, on a show I just did recently, Causing the Effect, I presented this. If I assume cyberspace is an extension of human consciousness, again, I use that as a metaphor. It hasn't happened yet. It's happening gradually. But with time, it becomes increasingly, particularly for children, part of our self-identity formation, part of our self-identity. And as I said, talking about my own personal experiences, I am a laid back type B personality kind. I don't get angry often, but boy, when this troll was targeting me, again, for me to get in my car and drive there, that is not me. So when we say intrapsychic, again, I don't know, I don't have an explanation. There is something going on online in terms of whether it is somehow connected or connecting with aspects of human consciousness. Possibly the digital universe is mimicking aspects of the brain, but for some reason we respond, we have a different perceptual experience when it comes to being online as opposed to online. So I would love to know the intrapsychic occurrences that are going on.
That might be something we can pick up at another time. Thank you for that, Michael. Thank you.
There we go, Michael. I do have just one more question here. So recently, with technology advances, as we know, are just rapidly increasing, the cyber stalkers are rapidly increasing their tactics right along with them. There was, and luckily I have not experienced any victims I'm supporting who have had this, but Apple tags. Is that a real issue that you're having in America at the minute? Because it seems to be making the news.
To be honest with you, you'll have to educate me. You said Apple tag.
Yeah. So
could you explain that? Because I liked on your Instagram. I didn't have time to read it. What are? Forgive me. I'm a
That's
student.
okay. So we've had a real educational with children particularly, and with young people that are using TikTok and Instagram particularly. These are the ones that like to take selfies all the time.
Right.
So there's been a real push to educate them to make sure their location services are turned off of their devices.
Okay.
Because otherwise you can click on the picture and see exactly right to the meter the location that they're at.
I just found, again, and because I'm mobile device ignorant, although I learn about as much as I can, location apps, which I just learned from one of my Gen Z coworkers, a young lady who was dating a fella. I'll just give her a shout out. Her name is Nudge. God bless her. She's one of the medical professionals. But she had showed me that on her, I don't know if it was Android or iPhone, I believe, she had location app with this young fella. And at any given time, they could see location of one another. So
an Apple tag is a separate little tiny round device about that big that you can attach to any one of your devices so that you know where it is all the time.
Oh my goodness.
What they're finding now is stalkers are hiding them in their victims' vehicles or on their person, or so that they can track their location at any given moment.
Amazing.
Now, this is such new technology. I don't know what prevention we could do for such a thing, because, you know, you educate a victim on shut your location services off, make sure your online social media is as tight as it possibly can be so you can still use it. How do you counteract something like this?
Well, that's good. I wish I had an answer for that one. That I'll have to noodle and think about that one. How do you handle something like that? I mean, I hate to say this. I don't know right now. I mean, I have to think about, I mean, I don't have an answer. That is something very serious, and it'll be interesting to see at what level does the stalker / online stalker get to, where he's actually going and using these devices and putting them under the rear wheel of a car, so forth and so on. Can I ask, before we end, one of the questions which we didn't get to, you had Professor Matt Frew at UWS, he's going to be hosting a seminar in February about transformation technologies to the metaverse.
Yes, I want to talk about that, but I want to kind of just pop back again, because there was a big article in our papers about a celebrity who was being stalked, someone who had a high media profile, and her stalker had actually put one of these Apple tags, slipped it into her bag. Now, we do say to our young people, if you're going out to clubs or discos or wherever it is, nightclubs, and you've got a drink, make sure your drink's covered so nobody can put a date rape drug into your drink or spike your drink in some way. And I think that's the way we're going to have to be going if these become more popular, is don't have jackets with open pockets, keep your bag closed, and reduce any way that anyone can slip anything into your bag, into your handbag, or into your jacket. We certainly can't go scanning our cars all the time. But yes, moving on, because what I'm interested in is, because we also spoke about the metaverse, didn't we? We're looking at the, this new concept that's coming in, and Facebook is certainly moving forward in that one into the new metaverse. And we actually have a Professor Matt Frew, who's a senior lecturer at the University of West of Scotland. Matt spoke at our international conference in 2021 on virtual worlds and dream worlds, and how it's going to be synonymously interlinked with stalking.
Oh my goodness. Yes.
Joined together because of the transformation age of technologies, and it's going into this metaverse. But what I was going to say is, when we're looking at the metaverse, we're looking at virtual online stalking, we're moving into avatars, and all these new concepts are coming in. And what we were saying was, what we understand just now is the virtual world is an extension of reality at this present moment. But what I'm hearing is that reality is actually going to become an extension of our virtual world. The whole paradigm's changing completely.
Yes. Again, I'm not smiling because cyberspace is an extension of human consciousness. What's going to be discussed when Mr. Frew talked, virtual reality and artificial intelligence, but we'll stick with virtual reality, as I said earlier, is going to completely change the human condition. So now with the metaverse, it's 20 years from now, we are going to be flabbergasted on what's going on in social media. It's going to be completely different. So now when you go online, such as Second Life, and you're dealing with virtual reality, you're looking at avatars that you can tell it's an avatar. Eventually, my hunch is that the avatars are almost going to look exactly like us.
So you might not be able to answer this, because I'm really quite fascinated by the whole subject. So when someone is using their avatar to stalk, as you say, it's not going to be long before an avatar is going to look the same. You can't exactly charge an avatar.
Correct. And this is why we need to, again, this is why we need a Center for Action against Stalking in every county of this country, because I can see, and again, I'm not prophetic, it's just common sense. When I wrote iPredator back in, I started to jot it down in 2002. I was also a forensic psychologist working in the courts. 99% of all assailants, of all crime, of everything back then, not 99%, but most of it was offline. But I knew, when I had thought to myself, I'm like, if I'm a criminal, if I'm a deviant, if I'm, somebody is looking to hurt others, where better to go? Cyberspace. Absolutely. And now here we are in 2022, and now we're being introduced to this concept called metaverse, where we have virtual reality. And ladies, it is only 2022. Imagine 2050, what it's going to be like. It's all going to change. So what you say, how do we hold accountable an avatar? Well, as I said, it's working with Centers for Action Against Stalking or other centers to be able to find who is behind that avatar. And that is a tall hill a high hill to climb to be able to figure that out, but it can be done.
We'll need to do it, won't we? Thank you, Michael. Anyone else get any other questions just before we start to think about drawing to close, Amanda? No? Jen, have you got any other questions?
No, I don't think so. This has been really, really interesting. Thank you so much.
Oh, Anne, can I just add one quick thing?
Yeah.
Because you had said there was one question that your research does not distinguish between cyber harassment and cyber stalking.
Oh, the concepts, yes.
Yes. The difference is that it's cyber harassment up until he or she begins to make direct or indirect threats of physical harm, or you begin to experience fear. Normally, cyber harassers, how do I say this in a what they're trying to piss you off. They're trying to provoke and harassing, constantly contacting you. Either they're obsessive compulsive, they're trying to, get in contact with you, or they're taunting you. But if it moves into the realm where they're making threats directly or indirectly about you, or you begin to experience fear, you're afraid of them, that's when it becomes cyber stalking. And that's when it moves into a whole different realm.
So can I go back to your experience, Michael, when you had your troll who hijacked and created a website under your names, identity theft, etc. Did this stalker create fear or anger? Because I'm hearing it was anger it triggered.
Oh, no, it stayed in the realm of, that's why I defined him as, at my website, shadow troll. You can see it under trolls.
Shadow troll.
And cyber harassment. I never got to the point of being fearful, but in his defense, he's no longer with us. He's passed. He never threatened to hurt me. So when I say direct or indirect threats of physical harm, that is basically literally using information technology to threaten you. Indirect threat would be, Anne, when you walk out of your office today, you better check your brake lines or make sure you don't have any 9-penny nails in your tires. That's an indirect threat. You never know what's going to happen if you keep drinking, you going out. You never know if you'll end up having a roofie ending up in your drink at that bar you go to over on West 65th, an indirect threat. That is cyber stalking. Cyber harassment is just habitually, obsessively contacting a person and then making, funding them, slandering them. So in my experience, the shadow troll, I won't give his name, I was angry.
That's what I mean. And when we are working with victims of stalking, the majority of stalkers don't issue an overt threat, like sending flowers or, say an iPredator and they've got their eye on someone that they really fancy and they just send endearing messages or emojis of nice flowers, that type of thing. And so there's nothing threatening, it's endearing, it's courtship behavior. They're trying to court the victim into some sort of relationship in some way. There's nothing threatening there, but the very fact it's persistent and unwanted behavior is what gives rise to the alarm or the concern or the fear, not the behaviors per se.
Most certainly, and this goes back to the Mullins work that you guys know about when it comes to stalker, the different types of stalkers. That could be an incompetent suitor or an intimacy seeker, but even online. But the way to differentiate that, the sweet emojis, if you ask him to cease and desist, to stop, and he continues, then it moves into a different realm.
Thanks, Michael. Perfect, yes. Absolutely. No. Thank you for clarifying that.
Yes, it deals with consent. So if you're not consenting and you make it clear and he continues, that's a whole different ballgame.
Thank you so much. We're going to have to start drawing the session to a close. I think at the beginning we thought, well, I think you said, Michael, will never last for an hour and a half. And here has been the most highly informative session ever. Has any of the rest of the team got anything they want to say just before we finish our thanks and start to close down?
Just a big thank you. It's been really, really helpful.
It's been absolutely fascinating. I've got lots of notes here, and I just want to say thank you, Michael. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much for being with us today and imparting all that fantastic and wonderful information. Thank you so much.
Ms. Ann and all the other, thank you for action. I mean, the Center for, what a wonderful idea. And if you ever need somebody to advocate for you, that needs to be spread and to be in every county. Here in the United States, they're called county. In the UK, what are they called, counties? Different areas. You need to have a Center for Action Against Stalking in every county of the country.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yes, I agree. I agree. But we are hoping through the Centre of Action Against Stalking, it is going to be a global network.
Most certainly.
So we will be working with international and international. I'll come back to you on that. Okay. Wonderful. Thanks, Michael. Thank you so much. Thank you, Jen, and thank you, Amanda. Okay.